So thank you everyone for joining the Education Writers Association for this webinar on teaching English learners after the pandemic shutdown, what reporters need to know. I'm Lori Crouch, EWA's Assistant Director. Before we begin, let me go over some housekeeping items. If you have a question for our speakers, type them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please include not only your name, but your affiliation when you ask your question. And please ask questions at any time and we'll get to them during the Q&A period at the end. As soon as the webinar closes, you'll see an evaluation survey. Please complete it. Your feedback is important and helps us improve. Today we're joined by researcher and a principal, and most importantly, we're joined by Zaidee Stavely, a reporter for EdSource, who has covered English learners and immigrant education for a very long time, and I'm pleased she can moderate for us. So with that, I'll send you over to Zaidee.
Thanks. So today we have two speakers. We have Patricia Garcia-Arena. She's a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research. And we also have Jessica Meléndez-Carrillo. She is the principal at Congressman Silvestre and Carolina Reyes Elementary School in El Paso, Texas. So we're going to begin with Patricia, and she's going to discuss a survey that the American Institutes for Research conducted about educators' response to the pandemic, and specifically regarding English language learners.
Thank you, Zaidee. All right, I want to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you a source where you can find some information about the national survey that AIR has conducted recently on the public education response to COVID. And Lori is also going to be sharing with you the link to this particular page. It's a goldmine of information. You'll go through here. It'll tell you the goal of the survey. So as everyone knows, in spring of 2020, we shut down schools. Children were sent home unexpectedly, and it changed education as we know it. And we've been trying to understand what this means for students, parents, educators, policy moving forward. And in particular, we're going to talk about English learners. I had the pleasure of looking at the data with the English learner lens in about a year ago now, in October of last year, to understand what this meant for English learners. So if we scroll down on this page, excuse me for making a little bit, some of you might be getting some motion sickness. You'll see in October of 2020, you'll see a spotlight for English learners. And this is a PDF of the brief. And what we found when we looked at this survey, we'll open this up really quickly. And I encourage all of you to go to the website and look at this along with other briefs and tools around this national survey. It presented the survey results for over 700 school districts that responded at the time to the survey. It showed just the variety of experiences children have in this country when it comes to public education. You'll see from this brief, there are two main findings. One is your experience really differed in districts where there were a high percentage of ELs enrolled versus not. So if you were in a district with many ELs, you had existing resources and infrastructure to deal with the sudden change that a global pandemic is going to bring to your educational experience. And then another big finding that emerged from this brief and from this data was that it differed from based on where you were in this country, if you lived in an urban area versus a rural area. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of that in other pieces, that the rural areas had more difficulty with internet access and just being able to do this switch all of a sudden to online learning. And the brief then goes and shows you these figures of this change, specific distance learning resources for students. Again, if you had a high percentage of EL district, you already had EL specific materials available for distance learning, but not so much in rural areas. Learning materials in Spanish. 75% of ELs in the United States are Spanish speakers. That's 3 out of every 4. So those high percentage EL districts probably have a lot of Spanish speakers, right? So they have learning materials in Spanish. Interpreters or family liaisons. When we're doing the switch to suddenly the parents are teachers, right? Those family liaison community folks to help speak with parents whose first language may not be English. Again, rural areas didn't have this resource compared to urban areas, and the high percentage of EL districts had that resource available. So it just shows the difference of experiences, and it goes on to talk about district requirements as well differed across these different characteristics. So that just gives you a quick snapshot. And I also wanted to show you really quickly, this is a great resource for anybody who's just interested in diving into this survey. It's a public data interaction tool that allows you to look at all these different topics that the survey asked administrators to answer in the spring of 2020. So I encourage you to look at this tool. I believe Lori sent this out right before the meeting today. So it gives you an introduction to the tool and how to use it. But I'm just going to go really quickly to give you a little snapshot of what you could do here. So I'm looking at distance learning and expectations. If it opens up, if not, here we go. So here it looks at about how many hours per day on average are students expected to be online. And I wanted to go to English learners since that is our topic today. So by percent of English learners. And then it'll give you some hours. So you'll see by high and low percentage of EL, there isn't too much of a difference, but high percentage EL, the expectation is a little bit different. You have a little higher number of hours that you're attending virtual classes and working on assignments. So this is just a way for those data folks and who are interested in looking at some different comparisons. This is an interesting way to look at the data. And if you play around with something and have some questions, you're more than happy to be more. I'm more than happy to help you understand what you're looking at too. So I encourage you to reach out after today's webinar if you have any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Patricia.
Yep.
Let's hear from Jessica Meléndez-Carrillo. She's going to tell us a little bit about the efforts that her school is making to bring English learners up to level and help improve their English after the distance learning.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be part of this panel today. I am a proud elementary school principal in El Paso, Texas. Um, we're very rich in cultural diversity, and my campus is a pre-K through fifth grade setting with a very unique dual language program that serves English learners and Spanish learners. The enrollment at my campus is 632 students, and 80% are Latino, 40% English language learners, and 75% at-risk students. I want to say that we're a binational, bicultural community of two countries because El Paso, Texas stands on the Rio Grande across the Mexico-United States border from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. And last semester and over the summer, my team, we brainstormed regarding, different strategies, different initiatives that can help us support address the learning loss that our English learners experienced. Not being able to practice the social, the academic language skills that they need, not being able to connect a lot of the times for the synchronous and asynchronous learning really affected their learning, their growth and progress. We also had to come together and think about how to integrate the social emotional part of it, as many students lost a family member. So that was and continues to be very important to me. One of the things that we found is that our English learners face many challenges, and we know that an undocumented percentage of American citizens cross the border daily for school, and some students stayed with siblings in Ciudad Juarez because their parents had to work multiple jobs and they had to figure out a way to survive during the pandemic, to be able to provide for their families. So that was difficult, and at the same time they were unable to cross over coming back to El Paso because they were staying with grandma and with grandpa. Um, so that became a connectivity issue. Students were not able to log in. There were a lot of struggles there. So thinking of that last year and over the summer, we decided to roll out this year an initiative that we call the 7-minute writing. And so every day, all our students write a response to a prompt given. And for our dual language classes, they get to use the language of the day. So we have a calendar that we use, and it's an English day and a Spanish day because we follow the 50% model. And so that was such a unique opportunity for our students to be able to express themselves, to generate ideas, to be able to just write what they felt. And that helped us not only to address the instructional part of it, but also the social emotional. We want to narrow those gaps, but we also want them to know that that's an outlet to express themselves. And that's how we build that social emotional. So the 7-minute writers, the writing component is very powerful at our campus. I start the day in the announcements, sharing the prompt of the day, and I tell them a little bit about my thoughts to kind of generate ideas. So you'll see them at breakfast time already thinking, oh, Mrs. Carrillo said she does not like cheese because of this reason. And now they're thinking, what is it that I don't like? So making that connection is very powerful for English learners because that's how they're able to write to learn. And that's how they know that we value their voice, and we want them ultimately, right, to be fearless writers that are able to express themselves. So those are a little bit of just sharing a little bit of the efforts that my school has done in order to support our English learners.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. I think as I start the question to the speakers, I'm going to give you all a couple of story ideas when you're thinking about covering English learners in your area. So actually, this idea, the 7-minute writing, is a really good one. I think you can ask schools and districts, and then also schools, if you have teacher sources, what they're doing to get students writing and reading in English and talking in English after the pandemic. So one of the big problems with distance learning, even if districts had resources, like Patricia mentioned, some of the districts had more resources than others for distance learning. I think everyone struggled with the fact that learning English part of learning English is just interaction. And so you can't really learn a language that well over a screen. So part of it is talking with peers, playing on the playground, speaking in another language. And that goes for English and for dual immersion for another language such as Spanish or Mandarin or any other language that students go learn in school in a dual language program. So I think one of the things is just to see what people are doing differently this year to try to get students using English in the classroom. And it's interesting that what Jessica mentioned, because other teachers have also shared with me the idea of both bringing in English and working on social emotional. So teachers in California have shared with me ideas where they're having students talk every day in the morning, do a really specific amount of time talking and sharing about feelings, writing in journals. Those kinds of things are really helpful because of the trauma that a lot of students experienced over the pandemic. I would also ask about the shortage of bilingual teachers and how that has changed during the pandemic, just because so many districts are struggling to find enough personnel in general, enough staff. And substitutes are a big problem right now too, to try to find substitutes because there are so many absences due to COVID or due to quarantine. So asking about, are there enough bilingual substitutes? Does the district have enough bilingual teachers to staff all their classrooms and all of those needs? And also asking about testing. So I'm going to ask our speakers a little bit about this too, but one of the issues that I found during the pandemic was that it was hard to test students on English during the shutdown. And part of that is because it's not just something that you can do at home by yourself. Part of it is students have to be tested to see if they can understand when they're listening, speaking, reading, and writing, right? And so some of it is an interaction as well. The tests are different in every state, but everybody does have to test English learners every year to see how they are progressing until they're determined to be fluent in English. And so during the pandemic, we're still in a pandemic, but during the down, it was difficult to conduct those tests. And in some places, they figured out ways to do some of the tests online or to bring people in person. But there was also on the part of parents to bring in students in person. So there's a big gap in California, and I imagine throughout the country, as far as what information schools have about students. And so one of the things that has come up that when I'm talking with teachers and district officials for me is what other ways are they using to try to find and assess where students are and how much English they've learned since the last time they were tested, and what kinds of supports they need, because that helps teachers figure out where to put them and what groups to use and what kinds of supports they need to try to help them learn English more fluently. Just one of the things that's really important is to ask about the asset and that students are bringing from the time that they spent at home. So, we talk a lot about the language that students lost because they were at home, perhaps didn't have much English around, but for some students, that was an opportunity to learn more of their home language and to speak more in their home language. So I think it's important to look at that as well. And just in general, not pandemic related, I think it's important to look at what you mean when you're talking about English learners. So, there's all kinds who are English learners. First of all, not all speak Spanish, but also most English learners were born in the United States. So that's a lot of people some people don't understand that. So I think it's important to think about that. And also just the different subgroups of English learners. So some English learners are newcomers, just arrived in the United States. Some English learners have been, most English learners obviously were born in the United States, as I just said. started school as English learners in kindergarten, learning a second language in addition to the language that they learned at home. But they may have taken a lot longer to learn English than others. And many districts call these students long-term English learners. And then also just the students who were English learners when they school and have since reclassified, which just means that they were determined to become to be fluent now in English. And those often are not tracked as English learners anymore, and so they're considered, English speakers now. I think it's important for reporters and also for districts to look at how those students are doing. There has been some research that shows that students who were once learners and who are now fluent in two languages, English and a previous language, actually do better in some ways than native English speakers who do not speak a second language. So I think it's something that we often miss and just something to look at. So we can talk more about story ideas in a little bit, but I'm going to begin asking some questions. So Jessica, what are the biggest challenges that you think English learners face this year? To Patricia as well.
I think one of the biggest challenges that they face this year, English learners, is being able to transition 100% in person. You just mentioned a lot of great things, but one of the things that I completely agree is that when, our let me begin just by saying that our teachers have done such an amazing job in being able to, the assessment piece, they kind of had to rewire, somehow their pedagogy, to try to learn how to teach in this virtual world, correct? I think everybody agrees that, as far as that. But I think last year, students were limited to that small square, and a lot of the time, some of those kids didn't come back the whole year. Some of the kids came back and they were in learning pods. My district offered learning pods. And so we were able to have some students back at a certain point. But I think the ones that stayed at home for the whole year, it was a huge challenge for them to be able to come back 100% because they things from penmanship, being able to hold a pencil because they were so used to using the computer, scrolling down the screen and being able to complete the assignments and everything. So I think the transition to 100% has been a challenge, but on that same note, it has been the greatest thing ever because we have been able to target those skills that they lost, the language development, the loss of content, the vocabulary development. And so even though we're still using technology because we're still using it as a tool, it's not the main resource. So it's just a tool that we're using. So that first teach, coming back to the first teach, writing, and that's why the 7-minute writing was also one of the main reasons why we wanted to bring it back, because kids forgot really left to right, a sentence, a period, how to use it, uppercase, lowercase, very basic skills that by third grade you should master. So definitely I can say that was one of the biggest challenges, the transition to 100% in person, and the social emotional, the loss that they experienced of that person that they care about. Those two things were the top challenges for my campus.
How about you, Patricia? Do you have anything?
And I forget to unmute. Thank you for both of you. Mentioned some great points and very important ones about how different or heterogeneous ELs are, and we often forget about those nuances that make us all unique, right? So the only thing I would add there is one challenge that I've heard many districts talk to me about is exactly what Zaidee mentioned about bilingual staffing. So a lot of children that have gone back to in-person, their bilingual support or language supports they may have been involved in prior to the pandemic have changed because of staffing needs. So their services are a little bit different, which has had to alter the class schedule for both gen ed teachers and the EL students. So that has, you know, I've heard parents, you know, say to me, I had to choose. You know, the services my child was enrolled in prior to the pandemic aren't available anymore in the same district, in the same school, and I had to choose. So now she's not getting support in her home language. So that has been one challenge. You know, the teaching shortage, let alone the bilingual teacher shortage. The bilingual teacher shortage has always been there, right? And the pandemic just, I think, exacerbated the problem for us. But the staffing shortage has been an issue that has affected schools nationwide.
And what about, so we often talk about you know, losses and challenges, but what about the strengths that English learners and their families bring to the classroom? You know, maybe always and or after the pandemic, and you know how schools can build on those.
Yes, I think for what I can mention there is the resilience. I think that as a school principal, I have monthly meetings with my parents, and I had it throughout the pandemic. I had the monthly chat with the principal, and so we would meet in Zoom. And I always appreciate the parental support, and I always love the parental support. I think that's a piece that we tend to forget at times, how important parents are in supporting those English learners and really everyone. Um, they want their kids to be the best. They want to help them. They want to be there, but sometimes they don't know how to do it. And so as leaders, I think the strength that we need to build upon is that eagerness that they have to want to work with you as a school. And I think that we need to set up the platforms, we need to set up the processes and the procedures so that parents feel welcome coming to school and meeting with you, asking questions. And when I meet with them, I tell them, this is the one chance, this is the chance you have to tell me any questions you have, because you know, they when they want to talk to me, we have to set up an appointment, and then you know, it kind of, it's based on when can I meet you. But when I'm in the chat with the principal, I'm there and I'm present and I'm visible, even if it's in Zoom or in person. And I tell them, ask me the questions, let me teach you some tools. So I'll bring the district testing coordinator, I'll bring my assistant principal and have sessions about learning, about how can you teach your kids about invented spelling, what can we do to support phonetics, and what can we do for phonological awareness. So when you teach parents, when you give them the tools, that's just a powerful thing to do. So for me, the biggest strengths that we have for English learners is to build that connection with parents, because our kids are able to utilize their home language to understand their second language, to make connections. So if their parents are making connections with you as a school, they're going to definitely make connections with everybody. So that's a powerful dynamic right there.
That's
Great.
really interesting that you mentioned that, because a lot of teachers actually told me, like during the pandemic, they were forced to do more parent participation, to engage more with parents in different ways, and that they felt that was the strength that they want to keep doing. I don't know if you've heard of that too, Patricia?
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to talk about. Good segue. Yeah, exactly that. Prior to the pandemic, you'd often hear about this cultural mismatch between home and school, and they were kind of two separate places. And then all of a sudden, we have to turn on our cameras, and like behind me, here's my home. There's no way of hiding it, right? So it's a window into somebody's life that you didn't have before. And that transparency, you know, with Jessica, you mentioned the chats and the time to talk to them openly about things, the transparency that the pandemic kind of forced us to have, you know, is a positive thing in a lot of ways for schools and for parents. Suddenly they had this new line of communication open with teachers and administrators that just wasn't there before, and they're hoping that that will continue. I heard from many districts about making, parent-teacher conferences were virtual, right? And suddenly they said a lot more parents were showing up because it's just a lot easier to connect on your phone, or, suddenly you don't have to make this commute. You don't have to, find childcare for other kiddos at home so you could go to this parent-teacher conference. So those are the types of things that folks have talked about wanting to have continue. And then back to the strengths, say you mentioned, bilingual students later on in their academic career showing, maybe outscoring or, passing in their monolingual peers. And that has a lot to do with your brain. When you speak more than one language, there's a lot of brain research out there that shows you have different synapses kind of like shooting off and connecting with each other when you have to speak one language. If you think about suddenly, if I go from Spanish to English, or I'm in a trilingual home, if I go Spanish, English, Portuguese, right? Bilingual individuals don't make grammatical mistakes if they don't know that word or the way to say it in a particular language. That's when they'll code switch, but they'll code switch in a way that is grammatically correct. So if you think about what has to happen in your brain for that, you're constantly thinking, okay, what am I going to say next? How am I going to express myself? So that kind of just excitement going on in the brain, if you think about all the things that have to change for you to just say one thing to someone, is just that, that malleable part of the brain, and just being able to move. That is why you're able to just learn so many new things, right? And change, if you're a bilingual individual, you're constantly dealing with change. So in your own environment and who you're speaking with, you choose which language you'll speak to depending on who you're speaking with. So that social awareness is just a strength that you can take in so many different ways in the real world, right? So that social awareness of your context is something that goes beyond just learning the basics of a language, right? And that you can just take on in so many different contexts. So those are strengths that we need, I think, as just as a field, as a society, I hope we'll see as an advantage.
Patricia, if I may add
Yeah.
something about what you said, I think that you mentioned about parent-teacher conferences and how
Okay.
having that some type of flexibility, and I think it goes right in line with parental involvement, because before the pandemic, we still had challenges in communicating with parents and being able to get them to come to school. But this changed, I mean, everything, in the sense that now parents had the flexibility to sign up. So we gave our parents the flexibility to sign up with in-person parent-teacher conference or virtual parent-teacher conference, and we had 100% participation. So I think parents are more willing to, during their lunch break, schedule that meeting, because it is valuable to them. They want to know about their kids, but at times work and life and having to provide for their family, it's not an option at that time. But providing that flexibility has changed this aspect, which is parental involvement. So I just wanted to mention that, how powerful that is.
It's an interesting thing that we've all known that. So what are some innovative techniques that schools started using during the pandemic, or maybe used more during the pandemic? We just talked about one, which is family participation. Beyond that, what are some interesting techniques that schools started using during the pandemic for English learners that they should continue now that most English learners are back in the classroom?
Do you want me to take
Either
this one first, Jessica?
Sure.
All right. So I'm sure we all started learning all these new applications together. Some of these I, didn't even know existed, right? Prior to the pandemic. What I have heard from districts is using a variety of different methods, right? So just like you would do in a regular in-person classroom, you're using visuals, you might be sending materials home. I've seen a lot of folks, while they're using the visuals, they'll give students an audio version of that. So you're still hearing how something should be read, or you're still getting some of that listening and speaking aspect of things. Though they would pair up students for activities. They'll use whiteboard apps or Jamboard, things like that during a lesson. And I'm still seeing that taking place even when most districts have moved to all in person. But I also see that quick switch to virtual is not that big of a hurdle anymore. They have plans in place that we're not. So all of those techniques, I think, it's definitely an advantage. It was a steep learning curve, right? And like Jessica said, amazing job done by educators and administration to make this happen so quickly. But
Yes, and if I may add to that, I think the only thing that I would add is that the use of technology gave the kids more confidence to explore, to share, and to teach their teachers at times. So I'll have a conference with the teacher and say, I can't believe, I didn't know how to do that. So kids our English learners are looking for all those tools that the caption in a movie, or they're using the tools that they need to that they're available, so that they can they can go ahead and succeed, because that's what they want. They want to succeed. So I think that what I see in the classroom is that our kids are using technology as a resource, as a tool, with more maturity and focus, which is a great thing to see.
Yeah, I heard teachers talk about using Flipgrid and Seesaw, like for
yep.
students talking, because they weren't in a classroom. They would have them record a video of them talking. And actually, I just spoke with a teacher recently who started using doing coding in a long-term English learner class, so that the students could get a chance doing electives, because they couldn't do electives because they were in an English language development class, but also using the project of coding a robot to also learn English at the same time. And so that's also something that I think I've heard people say is sending materials home, even though maybe we didn't used to do that, but sending materials and things home for people to do at home, projects at home. What is there one single strategy that either of you feel schools definitely need to implement that there maybe not for English learners?
That's a tough one.
More than I think more than that a single strategy. I think I want to highlight the importance of lowering the affective filter, and that goes into research with Stephen Krashen, which is, we're talking about feelings and emotions when we talk about lowering the affective filter. And so Stephen Krashen, he cites motivation, confidence, and anxiety in the affective filter as an important role in second language acquisition. So when emotions like anxiety, fear, embarrassment are elevated, it becomes difficult for a child to learn that second language, that second language acquisition process. So having brain breaks, integrating breathing techniques, building relationships, going back to the basics, that first teach, providing visuals are imperative. I mean, as a leader, if I model that to my teachers, lowering their affective filter, it most definitely transfers to our kids. So I think it's something just to remember, that when a child feels safe, feels respected, feels happy, learning, just especially English learners, that second language acquisition is more likely to be successful than not doing that. So.
And I would just add, kind of adding a little bit to what both of you have mentioned, is just getting to really know your context in your community. Like you were saying, not all English language learners are Spanish speakers. Not all, majority have lived here. Just not assuming all your English learners are the same, right? So and have the same experience, especially after everything we've all gone through. I think it's even more important to, lower that affective filter a little bit and get to know each other as human beings, like, just and there you're going to realize really quickly what works best for that student. What really encourages them to learn and get excited about learning. Zaidee mentioned it takes a while for an English learner to, I don't even want to use this term, get up to par with a monolingual, right? It takes 4 to 7 years on average. And that's regardless of language, home language. It takes 4 to 7 years. And English language is a complex one, and it's not phonetically, you do not spell necessarily how the words are, said like in some Romance languages. So I always say to folks that say, why does it take so long? I go, have you tried to learn another language? It is not easy, right? So, and your home language is so tied to, no matter where you're coming from, it's so tied to who you are and how you express yourself. And we don't want necessarily children to shut that off, right? We want them to grow and also see the beauty in the English language and be able to express themselves in whatever language they choose. So just getting to know your students and and I think the pandemic helped us do that unexpectedly in different ways. So just kind of continuing that to find the best strategies to reach them.
What comes up for me from what both of you are saying is home language support, home language, not even support, just recognition and celebration of home language. So in the classroom, and I think whether a teacher is bilingual or not, whether in dual immersion or in bilingual education, there's that chance for students who maybe don't speak English fluently yet, but they do speak another language to be, the leaders and model their language to others, which helps with the whole self-consciousness issue that Jessica was talking about. But I think also just, time and time again, the research shows that like if you are supporting and celebrating and bringing in home cultures and home languages and encouraging students to continue to learn their home language, that will help with learning English. It's not one or the other. Since neither of you are journalists, I think it's really important for us to ask you, what are 2 stories each of you would like to read or listen to about English learners in the next few months?
I think one story that I can mention is how representation matter. I think that it's important to highlight that when kids see someone that looks like them, when it comes to reading books or a story, it's just powerful. So I think for me, the only thing that I can add to that or mention is that representation matter. So it matters. So when we have stories that talk about culture, like you just mentioned, Zaidee, when you validate their cultures and where they're coming from, I think seeing stories like that are very, very important so that kids can make those connections. I can also mention that stories in the border city, they're very powerful and they're very unique too. So I think it's important to also look into that. Just all the stories that our kids. I mean, I could talk to you all day about all the different stories that I had with so many kids and all their struggles and what they had to do, all these families to be able to attend school, to be able to make that progress, to be able to attend school, all the challenges that they face. So I think those are the two things that I can those stories that I would like to see, I would like to read or listen to about ELs in the coming months.
Yeah, I think one on resilience. We often hear stories about the achievement gap. There's struggling to always about the struggle, but very little about the successes. Um, and I always love those. Those always and English learners are reading them. They hear the stories too. So along with representation of in books and around them, I think it's important to also hear successes, the success stories and the people like them that have done and the people that have overcome that achievement gap and have succeeded and found ways to just really excel in their communities. And uh, I always like those stories. Those always bring a tear to my eye.
What questions should reporters ask schools and teachers and experts and other people? What's asking to try to get a sense of what's happening with English learners right now?
I think one question it could be, how can we partner up? I think that even for EWA, I so appreciate the invitation for me to be here. I think a lot of the times we 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 need to validate the experiences that our teachers and principals and leaders that are facing these challenges firsthand in the classroom on a daily basis. I think it's important to know that we have partners in education. So I think reporters should ask schools, how can we partner up? How can we help you build those social and academic language skills for ELs? I mean, that itself will be very beneficial.
I would encourage journalists out there to reach out to researchers. Like, I don't want my work to sit on a shelf. I want my work to help people like Jessica in some way, right? Um, so just to reach out and again build that partnership and ask, and really partner with parents too, like with community organizations. They're the ones that really understand what different groups of ELs are encountering right now. And I encourage you to look in those rural areas, like the survey shows. Rural areas are just a completely different experience for ELs, and look at those language groups that are not the majority. Those are a completely different story. They have a completely different narrative that's often not told. So I would encourage to kind of look at that untold story, because that's where I think some change needs to happen, and more awareness needs to be made, I think, in certain areas where they're often not in the spotlight.
Both of you have mentioned at different times the importance of parents reading aloud to kids, the importance of writing exercises, the 7-minute writing. Tell us more about those ideas.
Great. You want to start with Jessica? Or? Okay. So read aloud is huge. It's a strategy that parents, even parents who have not had a lot of formal education, can do read alouds in a sense of telling oral language stories. So why read alouds are great is that children learn from their surroundings, right? Interaction, right? So they hear how you change your voice with different characters, how you pause at the end of a sentence. Those are all important parts of fluency that often fluency is that last step for English learners that can be a hurdle because of the affective filter Jessica was talking about, they're often self-conscious when it comes to reading aloud themselves. As an EL, as a former EL myself, I didn't learn English until kindergarten. So I struggled with reading out loud. It was terrifying for me until I found somebody that to show me how I can actually use my language skills in my home language to help me with that fluency. And she taught me little tricks. So just that read aloud and that just the love of literature and the love of literacy that you get from that connection with somebody else who's taking out 10 to 15 minutes to tell you a story just opens up your imagination and just gives you a love of learning that other instructional strategies are just different to me. Read alouds are just, it brings literature alive for students, no matter what language they might feel strongest in.
I absolutely agree, Patricia. And I also want to mention that it's a very important way for us to, because a lot of the times parents feel like you were saying, Patricia, because they haven't had a formal education, they're not able to do certain things. But there's reading is just, it's just amazing. It's a wonderful way to bond with the family, to spend that, you know, before going to bed, reading a book. And it's so funny. And I want to mention that during the pandemic, I wasn't sure that my kids were reading. I wasn't sure that my students were reading. So I, I told all my staff, guess what? We're going to record videos and we're going to
Oh,
read
cool.
books to them. And so we did live videos, we send videos, and then the kids would say, what about in Spanish? Because at our campus, our dual language is, you know, mainly English and Spanish. So so we had to, okay, now we have to read a Spanish book because that's what they're asking us to do. So we became this wonderful way to make a connection with them, that even though they weren't physically in the building, I would go to different areas in my house, in my backyard, and I would show them my backyard. This is my wonderful cherry blossom tree. So now let's read a book. And to them, oh, that's her backyard. And reading. And I would just tell them, let's just stay with me, read with me. Let's read this wonderful book. My counselor did that, my assistant principal, my nurse. We were all on board. And I think when parents realized, you know what? Let's continue doing that. Let's continue reading. Let's build that. And so I do encourage parents to read at night before going to bed. I have a middle schooler and an elementary school kid, and I read with them all the time. And it doesn't matter what time in the day we get a book and we read. It is a very valuable thing to do. Reading is always powerful and amazing.
Lori, do you have questions for us?
I sure do. They just came in a big flurry. Jessica, a question from, and I will forget, the person should forgive me for if I pronounce this wrong, Deed. Jessica, what supports do you provide your teachers to best support their EL students?
I think as a campus, we're very strong in supporting each other. We have a very strong professional learning communities. So our PLCs, that's professional learning communities, we ensure that if we have a new teacher, that we're supporting each other. If there's a strategy that we feel that it's important for everybody to know because they attended a training, is that collaboration. I think for our school, it's not about working in isolation. So for English learners, because we all want to do our best, we collaborate with one another. So I do send them to several professional development opportunities, making sure that they're receiving the latest research, the latest support, shelter instruction, scaffolding, just everything that they need to know to support our English learners. And also, I want to mention that my teachers present at the state and national level. So for NAVE, the Texas Association for Bilingual Education, and NAVE, the National Affiliate for Bilingual Education. So they are very proactive in regards to sharing the knowledge, but also attending the latest research. So I think as a leader, being able to model that and encourage them and letting them know it's okay to not have all the answers.
Jessica? Yeah, I think there might be a problem with your mic, so.
Yeah, you might unplug it and replug it in and see what happens. While she's doing that, Patricia, what about cases where there's multiple languages in a school? I think Jessica's school is more predominantly Spanish speaking, but how do you deal with schools where multiple languages are spoken?
That's a great question, because those are the groups that often need just some additional support, because you can't necessarily help them in their home language. So one of the research approaches, one of the approaches that research has shown effective for those heterogeneous kind of linguistic groups is sheltered English instruction. So you're breaking up tasks in a way that help any English learner, regardless of language, to comprehend and follow and be part and be engaged in a lesson. One good example of a good instructional sheltered English strategy is background knowledge. I love to give the example, being calling in today from Illinois, is Abraham Lincoln. Most people know who Abraham Lincoln is, right? If you are US born, most people have heard of Abraham Lincoln. However, if you're an EL who recently came to this country, or who, even if you were born here, you might have not heard about Abraham Lincoln in your home. So it's just breaking that down for students and giving them that background knowledge. They soak it up and they'll learn it quickly. Just breaking it down in chunks so that it doesn't become something so new. So that is something that you can do regardless of home language. And then just trying to find connections in ways that the child can share their culture with the class, and just to show that there's ways that they should be proud of their language, and the fact that no one else speaks it. It's just a unique skill that they have that they get to teach others. And just having that approach just makes the person, the student, feel proud.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question, but your answers have to be very quick because we only have 1 minute left. Okay. What myths do you wish reporters would stop reinforcing? 15-second answer. I think we've delved into a couple of them, but are there other myths that you wish reporters would stop reinforcing?
Jessica, I'm going to let you take the last.
I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I think one thing is that, like Patricia said, that not all English learners, it's about Spanish. It's not only Spanish. There's so many cultures, there's so many languages. So I think that just knowing that there's so much out there in the research for English learners, that it's not only Spanish. So that's one of the things that I would.
Anything else, Patricia?
And there are English learners out there thriving. And, some are struggling, but some are really thriving, and to show the continuum.
Great. Well, I want to thank our guests today, Zaidee, Patricia, and Jessica, for taking the time out to talk to us about English learners. I'd also like to thank you all for persevering and staying with us for the hour. As the webinar closes, you'll see an evaluation survey. Please complete it. Your feedback is important and helps us improve. And please Check out our website, ewa.org/events, to sign up for future upcoming and online and in-person events. I think next week we're going to have a sponsored webinar on a new higher ed data tool you can use. So look for emails and social media about that event. And thank you again, and have a great day.